Listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you, because once you hear it, you can never unhear it. In November 1879, 5 men walked into a mine in the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee. None of them ever walked out. But here's what they don't want you to know. Those men didn't just disappear. They opened something that's been waiting in the dark for over a century, something that changes the rules of reality itself. And the authorities have been covering it up ever since. The Blackwood brothers weren't ordinary miners. Isaiah, Elijah, and Jeremiah Blackwood, along with 2 hired experts, a mining engineer from Pennsylvania and a geologist of considerable reputation, had discovered what they called black iron. But this wasn't iron. This wasn't even a mineral as we understand it. According to documents that survived the cover-up, this substance responded to sound, exhibited electromagnetic properties that defied physics, and seemed to maintain a connection across impossible distances. The night before they vanished, the youngest brother, Jeremiah, was heard screaming in his room about voices in the walls. The geologist, Frederick Walsh, was seen by locals with his hands shaking so violently he could barely sign receipts. The mining engineer, Thomas Green, wrote to his colleague at the University of Pennsylvania, "It responds to sound. God help us, it responds to sound." That was his final correspondence. When the mine was found abandoned on November the 17th, 1879, the entrance had been sealed from the inside. Not collapsed, sealed, with massive timbers braced against doors built like a bank vault. The men had barricaded themselves in. But against what? And why, if they were trying to keep something out? Were their horses still in the stables, unfed for days? Why was there still a half-eaten meal on the office table? The official story they fed the public was laughably inadequate. 5 experienced men simply abandoned their operation for reasons unknown. No violence, no foul play, case closed. But the deputy who investigated, Samuel Lockwood, later told his son the truth. Sheriff didn't want to go inside that mine. None of us did. There was a feeling about the place, like standing at the edge of a deep pit in the dark. You can't see what's below, but you sense the emptiness. What the authorities found but never reported was a metal container buried beneath the mine office floorboards. Inside was Isaiah Blackwood's journal, and the entries paint a picture that would terrify any rational man. The mineral exhibits characteristics inconsistent with any known element, he wrote. When exposed to certain conditions, it demonstrates remarkable effects, which I hesitate to detail even in these private pages. By October 21st, his entries had become desperate. The sounds are no longer subjective. All 5 of us heard them today. Not cave-ins or settling, something else. The final entry, dated just 2 days before they sealed themselves in forever, contains only one line. It is too late. They are coming through. Coming through from where? The Cherokee tribes had avoided Hollow Ridge for generations, calling it a place where the ground was wrong and it didn't hold sound right. They knew something the white settlers didn't, or refused to acknowledge. Some places on this earth are thin, where the barriers between what we call reality and something else become permeable. The Blackwoods hadn't just found a mineral deposit, they had found a doorway, and in their greed and ignorance, they had opened it. The black iron wasn't a substance, it was a key. A resonance frequency that could thin the walls between dimensions. And once those walls were breached, something on the other side began pushing back. The cover-up begs, and immediately, but the truth has a way of bleeding through, especially when it's this dark. The families of the missing men were given bureaucratic runarounds and told to accept that their loved ones had simply vanished. Sarah Green, the 16-year-old daughter of the missing engineer, kept pressing for answers. In her journal, she wrote about visiting the mine site. The forest seems to close around it, as though trying to reclaim the space and erase what happened there. I felt a heaviness in the air, a pressure behind my eyes. Near the sealed entrance, she found a scrap of paper in her father's handwriting. It responds to sound. The same phrase that haunted his final letter. But Sarah discovered something else the authorities missed, or chose to ignore. The silence around the mine wasn't natural. It was a perfect circle of absolute quiet, as if sound itself was being absorbed into something hungry. The local Methodist minister, Reverend William McNeil, tried to offer prayers for the missing men at the site. His parish records tell a different story than his public sermons. The silence there has weight to it. I counsel against superstition, but I must admit when I visited the site, I too felt a deep unease. McNeil documented something else disturbing. Everything connected to the Blackwood mine began to fail or bring misfortune. The horses sold at auction to settle debts all died or went lame within months. Tools and equipment from the mine, now scattered throughout the community, seemed cursed. A saw purchased from the liquidation shattered and nearly took a man's hand. A lantern from the office refused to light despite ample oil. The minister called it superstition, but admitted the pattern is difficult to dismiss entirely. This is how control systems work. They dismiss the evidence as coincidence, superstition, mass hysteria, anything but the truth, because the truth would force them to acknowledge that their understanding of reality is not just incomplete, but deliberately limited. In 1953, exactly 74 years after the Blackwood incident, a graduate student named Howard Reynolds began investigating the case for his doctoral thesis. Reynolds was methodical, experienced, and rational. Exactly the kind of man who should have been able to solve a historical mystery through research and logic. Instead, he discovered that some mysteries are designed to consume those who dig too deep. Reynolds found inconsistencies everywhere. The geological surveys indicated that Hollow Ridge shouldn't have contained significant coal deposits at all. So what were the Blackwoods really mining? His interviews with elderly locals revealed a consistent pattern. The Cherokee had avoided the area, animals wouldn't den there, and even now, decades later, it remained unnaturally quiet. Emma Davis, 91 years old when Reynolds interviewed her, remembered her grandmother's stories. The Cherokee wouldn't camp there. Said the ground was wrong, birds don't sing there. Even now it's always been a quiet place, but not the peaceful kind of quiet. The hungry kind. The hungry kind. Think about that phrase. What kind of silence hungers? Reynolds discovered that the U.S. Geological Survey had conducted a survey of Hollow Ridge in 1882, just 3 years after the incident. The report was listed in their catalogue, but missing from the archives. When Reynolds inquired, he was told it was likely lost during an office relocation in the 1920s. Convenient. Too convenient. By September 1953, Reynolds was writing urgent letters to colleagues, mentioning time constraints and growing concerns about outside interference. He told his faculty advisor he was being followed. His apartment showed signs of entry, though nothing was taken. On October 17, 1953, almost exactly 74 years to the day after the Blackwoods vanished, Reynolds himself disappeared. They found Reynolds' vehicle 2 miles from the Blackwood mine site, parked on a service road within the national park. Despite extensive searches, no trace of him was ever found. The official report blamed an accident. Perhaps he fell into a ravine or became disoriented in the dense forest. But his colleagues knew better. Reynolds was an experienced hiker who never went into difficult terrain unprepared, especially not at dusk. Among Reynolds' possessions, investigators found a partial draft of his thesis with a handwritten note in the margin, subsequently crossed out but still legible. The geographical anomalies extend beyond the mine site. Testing indicates a radius of influence that continues to expand. The implications are staggering if confirmed. The question is no longer what the Blackwoods found, but whether they released something that cannot be contained. Cannot be contained. Reynolds had realized the truth. Whatever the Blackwoods had opened in 1879 was still open, still active, still growing. The disappearance patterns weren't random. They were following a schedule, a rhythm, as if something was feeding on a regular cycle. In 1962, exactly 83 years to the day after the Blackwoods vanished, the Tennessee Mining Authority sealed the mine entrance with concrete. The foreman, Robert Crowley, filed an unusual report. Crew members reported auditory anomalies while working at the Blackwood site. Several complained of headaches and disorientation. Crowley resigned immediately after filing this report and moved his family to Ohio. One of his workers, James Watkins, later described hearing whispering coming from inside the hillside. Not words exactly, but something trying to sound like words. Another worker, operating the concrete mixer closest to the opening, began complaining his skin felt wrong, like something was moving underneath it. By lunchtime, he was seeing things that weren't there. The next day, he couldn't remember anything about the previous day at all. The pattern becomes clear when you step back and see the whole picture. Every November 17th, the anniversary of the discovery, something reaches out. Sarah Green, in her final days at age 92, would become agitated around midnight on November 17th, insisting she could hear her father calling to her from the other side of the wall. When nurses reminded her it was actually April, she would say, "Time moves differently where they are. Time moves differently where they are. This isn't the rambling of a senile woman. This is a woman who had spent 73 years living with the knowledge of what her father had found, what he had opened, and where he had gone." The nurses documented her final words. "They're still in there. They're still listening. The walls got too thin at Hollow Ridge." In 1967, the last surviving connection to the Blackwood case was severed when Sarah Green died. But the phenomenon didn't die with her. It evolved. Park rangers at Great Smoky Mountains National Park began documenting dozens of cases of hikers becoming temporarily disoriented in a 2-mile radius around the former mine site. Visitors reported unexplained audio phenomena, sudden onset of anxiety, and the feeling of being watched by something just outside their peripheral vision. These weren't random incidents. They clustered around specific dates, specific times, following a pattern that park authorities refused to acknowledge publicly. Several hikers required rescue after becoming inexplicably separated from their groups, though none disappeared permanently. The thing in the mine was learning, adapting, becoming more selective about whom it took and when. Dr. Eleanor Matthews, a geology professor from Vanderbilt, conducted soil and rock sampling from the area in 1956. Her published papers made no mention of anomalies, but her private research notes tell a different story. Samples from Site BW7 exhibit unusual electromagnetic properties that warrant further investigation. Her funding request was denied, and she abandoned the research entirely. When contacted years later, she refused to discuss her findings, saying only, "Some doors are better left closed." But here's what they don't want you to understand about control systems. They work by making you complicit in your own ignorance. They present you with official explanations that are just plausible enough to let you sleep at night, just reasonable enough to make questioning them seem foolish. Industrial accident, natural gas pockets, mass hysteria, coincidence. The truth is that powerful forces have known about places like Hollow Ridge for centuries. The indigenous peoples knew. The early settlers knew. But as our civilization became more advanced, more scientific, we lost that knowledge, or rather, it was taken from us. Hidden away in classified files and restricted archives, studied by people with clearance levels you've never heard of. Think about it. Why would the U.S. Geological Survey conduct a survey of an abandoned mine site 3 years after the incident, then lose the only copy of the report? Why would multiple researchers abandon promising careers rather than continue studying the Hollow Ridge anomalies? Why would park authorities refuse to allow excavation of a site that could answer historical questions? Because they already know the answers, and those answers would shatter the comfortable illusion of reality they've constructed for you. The Blackwood mine wasn't an isolated incident. It was just one of many thin places where something else bleeds through. And they've been managing these sites, controlling access to them, for longer than you might imagine. A physicist named Dr. Richard Chambers published a monograph in 1959 connecting the Blackwood incident to other cases of mysterious disappearances near geological anomalies. He called them thin places, locations where conventional physics becomes malleable. Indigenous peoples worldwide have legends of such places, often described as doorways to other realms. Chambers was denied tenure and disappeared from academic circles entirely. The only copy of Chambers's work is housed in the special collections of Miskatonic University Library. a repository of knowledge deemed too dangerous for general circulation, but even that limited access has been enough for certain individuals to piece together the larger pattern. There are coordinates, there are dates, there are frequencies and resonances that can thin the barriers between dimensions. What the Blackwoods found wasn't just black iron, it was a technology, an ancient technology for manipulating the fundamental structure of space-time itself. The substance responded to sound because sound is vibration, and vibration at specific frequencies can alter the quantum foam that underlies our reality. They weren't mining a mineral, they were excavating a machine. Thomas Green, the mining engineer, understood this toward the end. In his final letter to Professor Harrison at the University of Pennsylvania, he wrote, "The properties of this mineral defy conventional explanation. It responds to electrical current in ways I've never witnessed, and samples in proximity to one another seem to maintain a kind of resonance regardless of distance." Resonance regardless of distance. Quantum entanglement. Spooky action at a distance, as Einstein called it. The Blackwoods had stumbled onto technology that wouldn't be theoretically understood by mainstream science for another century. But someone, somewhere, had understood it all along. Green's letter continued, "We've sealed the lower shaft where the main vein runs deepest. Only the 5 of us have access. What we found there, I hesitate to commit to paper. Isaiah is convinced we're approaching something unprecedented. The source, he calls it. The source. Not a deposit, not a vein of ore, but a source. A generator. A portal. The Cherokee tribes called Hollow, a ridge, a place where the ground was wrong, but their oral traditions contain more specific warnings. Anthropologist James Mooney, in his study of Cherokee mythology published in 1900, documented references to star doors, locations where beings from the Nightland could cross over. These weren't metaphors or spiritual symbols. They were technical descriptions of interdimensional access points. The Cherokee shamans knew the signs, areas of unnatural silence where sound seemed to be absorbed rather than reflected. Places where time moved differently, where people could enter and emerge hours later, having experienced only minutes, or vice versa. Locations where the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds became permeable, allowing entities from somewhere else to manifest in our reality. What's crucial to understand is that these weren't random phenomena. The star doors operated on cycles, opening and closing according to celestial alignments, electromagnetic fluctuations, and other factors the Cherokee monitored carefully. They built their settlements to avoid these areas and developed rituals to keep the doors sealed when necessary. But European colonization disrupted these careful arrangements. As traditional knowledge was suppressed and the Cherokee were driven from their lands, the safeguards failed. The doors began opening again, and things that had been kept at bay for generations started bleeding through. The Blackwood mine was just one manifestation of a much larger breakdown in the barriers between worlds. This is why the cover-up has been so systematic, so thorough. It's not just about hiding one incident, it's about concealing the fact that our reality is far more fragile and permeable than we've been led to believe. The authorities know about the thin places, they know about the cycles, and they know that knowledge of these things could fundamentally alter the balance of power in our world. In 1968, teams from the U.S. Geological Survey conducted comprehensive mapping throughout Smoky Mountains National Park. Their published reports contain a telling omission. A circular area approximately 4 miles in diameter, centered on Hollow Ridge, is marked simply as topography unverified due to instrument malfunction. No explanation is provided for why sophisticated surveying equipment would fail only in that specific location. Dr. James Collins, who served on the USGS team, later became a professor at the University of Michigan. In a 1972 interview, he briefly addressed the omission. Some areas of the park presented unusual challenges for mapping. Equipment that functioned perfectly elsewhere would produce inconsistent results in certain locations. When pressed specifically about Hollow Ridge, Collins ended the interview abruptly. The journalist noted that Collins's hands had begun trembling visibly at the mention of the location. This is how institutional knowledge is managed and controlled. Scientists and researchers are allowed to encounter these anomalies, but only under controlled circumstances. They're given just enough access to understand the reality of what they're dealing with, then co-opted into the cover-up through a combination of career incentives and implied threats. Collins knew exactly what he had encountered at Hollow Ridge. His instruments hadn't malfunctioned. They had detected readings so far outside normal parameters that publishing them would have raised questions no one in authority wanted answered. So the data was classified, the area was marked as unverified, and Collins was undoubtedly briefed on the consequences of discussing his findings publicly. But here's what's truly disturbing. The 4-mile radius of the anomaly represents a significant expansion from the original 2-mile zone documented in the 1950s. Whatever was released from the Blackwood mine isn't contained, it's growing. The influence zone expands slightly each year, and with it, the number of people who experience unexplained phenomena in the area increases. The expansion follows a mathematical progression that suggests intelligence behind it. This isn't random energy bleeding through a crack in reality. This is something deliberately widening the breach, testing the boundaries of our world, learning how to manifest more effectively in our dimension. Park rangers report that the nature of incidents has changed over the decades, becoming more sophisticated, more targeted. Early encounters were crude, simple disorientation, basic audio hallucinations, temporary memory loss. But recent incidents show clear evidence of adaptive behavior. Hikers report being led away from their groups by sounds that mimic their companions' voices. Campers wake to find their equipment rearranged in patterns that form geometric shapes when viewed from above. Search and rescue teams detect radio transmissions from missing persons that appear to originate from impossible locations, underground, or somehow from the air itself. Most disturbing are the cases where people return from brief disappearances with knowledge they shouldn't possess. A lost hiker emerged after 3 days with detailed information about other missing persons cases from decades earlier. A ranger who vanished for 6 hours came back speaking fluent Cherokee, a language he had never studied. A geology student returned from an overnight solo trip with drawings of the mine's interior layout, despite the entrance being sealed since 1962. These aren't random psychic phenomena or stress-induced hallucinations. This is systematic data collection, an intelligence-gathering operation conducted by something that exists partially outside our normal space-time continuum. Whatever came through the Blackwood mine has been studying us, learning our language, our behavior patterns, our weaknesses. The question isn't whether something alien has made contact with our world. The question is how long it's been here. How many of these thin places exist globally, and what the ultimate objective might be. Because make no mistake, this is an objective, a plan, a coordinated effort that spans decades and possibly centuries. Here's where the story becomes personal, where it stops being about historical curiosities and becomes about your present reality. The Hollow Ridge phenomenon isn't unique. Across the globe, in classified databases you'll never see, similar incidents are documented and monitored. Remote areas where hikers disappear, ancient sites where modern equipment fails, urban locations where reality seems to glitch, where the rules of physics bend just enough to let something else peek through. These sites are managed by organizations operating beyond the reach of conventional government oversight. They have resources, technology, and knowledge that would astound you, and they've been using all of it to keep you ignorant of the true nature of reality, because knowledge of the thin places would give you power they can't control. Imagine knowing the exact locations where space-time is malleable. Imagine understanding the frequencies and resonances that can open doorways to elsewhere. Imagine having access to technology and resources that exist beyond the physical limitations of our dimension. That knowledge would fundamentally alter human civilization, and those in power have no intention of allowing that to happen. Instead, they feed you a steady diet of materialist reductionism, scientific dogma that dismisses anything unexplainable as imagination or fraud. They've trained you to mock and ridicule anyone who suggests reality might be more complex than the textbooks claim. They've made you complicit in policing your own ignorance, turning you into an agent of your own intellectual imprisonment. But some of us refuse to accept those limitations. Some of us dig deeper, ask harder questions, follow the evidence wherever it leads, even when it leads to truths that shatter comfortable illusions. We understand that the Blackwood mine represents something far more significant than a historical mystery. It represents proof that the world you think you know is just the surface layer of something infinitely more complex and dangerous. The real question isn't what happened to the Blackwood brothers. The real question is what they discovered in those tunnels and why that discovery had to be suppressed at all costs. Because suppressed it was, systematically, ruthlessly, with a level of coordination that suggests institutional knowledge far beyond what any local sheriff's department could muster. Every researcher who got too close was discredited, disappeared, or co-opted into silence. Every piece of evidence was classified, lost, or destroyed. Every witness was intimidated, relocated, or forgotten. This wasn't incompetence or bureaucratic bungling. This was a professional cover-up operation executed by people who knew exactly what they were dealing with and why it had to remain hidden. The technology the Blackwoods found threatens more than just scientific paradigms. It threatens the entire power structure of human civilization. In a world where certain individuals and organizations maintain control through the management of information, resources, and technology, the discovery of interdimensional access points represents an existential threat to their authority. Think about it. What happens to government control when citizens can access resources from other dimensions? What happens to economic manipulation when energy and materials can be obtained through quantum tunneling? What happens to social engineering when people understand that consciousness itself might be non-local, that human potential extends far beyond the limitations they've programmed you to accept? This is why the cover-up continues. This is why researchers still disappear when they get too close to the truth. This is why certain areas remain off-limits to civilian investigation. The thin places represent a threat to the control matrix itself, and that threat must be contained at all costs. But containment is becoming increasingly difficult. The digital age has made information harder to suppress completely. Declassified documents leak through government databases. Researchers share findings through encrypted networks. Witnesses post testimony on platforms that reach millions before the censorship algorithms can intervene. More significantly, the phenomena themselves are becoming harder to hide. Climate change, electromagnetic anomalies from solar activity, and the increasing instability of Earth's magnetic field are all affecting the thin places. The barriers between dimensions are becoming more permeable, not less. Incidents that once occurred annually are now happening monthly. Effects that were once localized to specific sites are now manifesting across wider geographic areas. The Hollow Ridge expansion is just one example of this global pattern. Researchers monitoring similar sites report consistent data. The influence zones are growing, the phenomena are intensifying, and the entities crossing over are becoming more sophisticated in their interactions with our reality. Something is building toward a culmination, a critical threshold where concealment will no longer be possible. This is why certain individuals in positions of authority are becoming increasingly desperate to maintain control of the narrative. They know what's coming, and they know their window of opportunity to manage the transition is closing rapidly. The choice they face is whether to reveal the truth gradually and attempt to maintain some level of authority, or to let events unfold naturally and risk complete loss of control. The smart money is on the second option. They've invested too much in the current system to abandon it voluntarily, which means when the barriers finally fail completely, when the thin places become obvious to everyone, the revelation will be chaotic, traumatic, and potentially devastating to social order as we know it. This brings us to the most dangerous knowledge of all, the knowledge of what you can do with this information. Because simply knowing about the thin places isn't enough. Simply understanding the cover-up isn't sufficient. The real power comes from learning to navigate these realities yourself, from developing the perceptual abilities and technical knowledge necessary to interact with interdimensional phenomena directly. The Cherokee shamans understood this. They didn't just avoid the star doors. They learned to open and close them when necessary. They developed protocols for safe interaction with entities from other dimensions. They maintained bloodlines of individuals with enhanced sensitivity to quantum fluctuations and electromagnetic anomalies. That knowledge still exists, hidden in oral traditions, encoded in ancient texts, preserved in the private libraries of certain families who have maintained the old ways despite centuries of suppression. But accessing it requires more than intellectual curiosity. It requires a fundamental shift in how you understand consciousness, reality, and your own potential as a human being. Most people aren't ready for that level of responsibility. Most people prefer the comfort of ignorance, the security of believing someone else is in control, the illusion that reality is stable and predictable. They would rather live as slaves in a managed reality than as free agents in a universe of infinite possibility and corresponding danger. But you're different, aren't you? You wouldn't have listened this far if you were content with comfortable lies. You want the truth, even if it's dangerous. You want knowledge, even if it comes with responsibility. You want power, even if it means abandoning the safety of ignorance. If you're ready to go deeper, if you're ready to join those who know the real nature of reality, then leave a comment right now with these words. The walls are thin. Type it exactly as I've said it. The walls are thin. This isn't just engagement for the algorithm, though it serves that purpose too. This is your declaration that you reject the comfortable illusions they've constructed for you. More importantly, type it twice. Once for this moment, this recognition of truth, and once more as a commitment to seek deeper knowledge, to question everything you've been taught about the nature of reality. The walls are thin, because they are, literally and figuratively. The barriers between dimensions, between consciousness and matter, between what you think is possible and what actually exists. When you post those words, you're not just commenting on a video. You're taking the first step in a process of awakening that will fundamentally change how you perceive and interact with the world. You're joining a network of individuals who understand that the Blackwood mine represents just the beginning of a much larger truth. But understand this. Once you start down this path, there's no going back to ignorance. Once you see the thin places, you can't unsee them. Once you understand how reality actually functions, you can't pretend the official explanations make sense anymore. This is a one-way journey into knowledge that will isolate you from those who still accept the managed version of reality. Are you ready for that level of commitment? Are you ready to know things that will separate you from family and friends who aren't prepared for the truth? Are you ready to take responsibility for knowledge that could be used to help humanity evolve, or to destroy civilization as we know it? Because that's exactly the choice the Blackwood brothers faced in those final days before they sealed themselves in the mine forever. They had discovered something that could revolutionize human understanding of physics, consciousness, and our place in the universe. They had found technology that could solve energy crises, enable instantaneous travel across vast distances, and open up infinite resources from parallel dimensions. But they also realized they had unleashed something they couldn't control. Isaiah Blackwood's journal entries show a man gradually understanding that the black iron wasn't just a tool, it was a beacon, a signal that attracted attention from intelligences existing in other dimensional frameworks. Every time they used it, every experiment they conducted, they were broadcasting humanity's location to entities that had been searching for worlds like ours. The mining engineer Thomas Green understood the implications first. His final letter reveals a man terrified by the scope of what they had uncovered. We've gone too deep. The material changes as we descend. It's not just a mineral deposit, it's something else entirely. Isaiah won't stop despite the warnings. He believes we found something that will change everything. I fear he may be right, though not in the way he imagines. What Green realized was that the black iron operated as a dimensional anchor, a way for entities existing in quantum superposition to manifest stable forms in our reality. The deeper the brothers dug, the stronger the signal became, and the more attention they attracted from things that had been waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity. By the time they understood the full implications of their discovery, it was too late to simply abandon the project. The entities were already responding to the beacon, already beginning to manifest in our dimension. The only choice left was to seal themselves in with their discovery and hope that would be sufficient to contain what they had unleashed. It wasn't sufficient. The sealing of the mine only delayed the inevitable, creating a slow leak instead of a catastrophic breach. For over a century, the entities that answered the Blackwood beacon have been dually establishing a foothold in our reality, learning our languages, studying our weaknesses, and preparing for a more substantial manifestation. This is why the disappearances follow patterns, why they cluster around specific dates and locations. The entities are conducting reconnaissance, gathering intelligence about human society and technology. Every person who vanishes near a thin place doesn't just disappear. They're taken for analysis, study, and eventually either returned with altered memories or retained for purposes we can only speculate about. Sarah Green's final words weren't the ravings of a senile woman. They were the testimony of someone who had spent 73 years in communication with her father, who hadn't died in 1879, but had been taken to wherever the entities exist between dimensions. They're still in there. They're still listening. The walls got too thin at Hollow Ridge. The walls between dimensions, yes, but also the walls between individual consciousness and collective intelligence. The entities don't just exist in other dimensions, they exist in a state of networked awareness that allows them to share information instantaneously across vast distances and even across time itself. This is why researchers who study the thin places often report precognitive experiences, knowledge of future events, or awareness of information they couldn't have obtained through normal means. Proximity to interdimensional phenomena affects human consciousness in ways we're only beginning to understand, activating latent psychic abilities and creating temporary connections to the entity network. But here's what the authorities don't want you to realize. These effects aren't necessarily hostile. The entities aren't invaders in the traditional sense. They're explorers, researchers, scientists studying our dimension the same way we might study a newly discovered ecosystem. The real question is whether humanity will be treated as an intelligent species capable of negotiation and cooperation, or as a primitive life form to be managed and controlled. That determination depends largely on how we respond to contact when it becomes undeniable. If we react with fear, violence, and attempts to suppress the phenomenon, we demonstrate that we're not ready for interdimensional citizenship. If we approach the situation with curiosity, intelligence, and willingness to learn, we might be invited to participate in something far greater than our current civilization. The cover-up isn't just about protecting institutional power. It's about ensuring that first contact happens on terms favorable to existing authority structures. The people managing these sites aren't just hiding evidence. They're conducting their own communication experiments, attempting to establish exclusive relationships with the entities while keeping the general population ignorant and powerless. This is the ultimate conspiracy, not just the suppression of truth, but the monopolization of humanity's most important evolutionary opportunity. While you're distracted by political theater and economic manipulation, a small group of individuals is negotiating the future of human consciousness itself, determining whether our species will evolve or remain forever limited to a single dimension of existence. The Blackwood brothers stumbled onto something they weren't prepared for, but you don't have to make the same mistake. You can learn from their experience, understand the dangers as well as the opportunities, and prepare yourself to navigate interdimensional contact safely and effectively. The preparation begins with understanding that consciousness itself is the key to interdimensional interaction. The entities don't communicate through language or technology as we understand it. They communicate through direct consciousness transmission, sharing information at the level of pure thought and intention. This is why exposure to thin places affects people so tightly. Their consciousness is temporarily expanded beyond the limitations of individual awareness, allowing them to access information from the entity network directly. Most people aren't prepared for this level of cognitive expansion and either shut down the experience through psychological defense mechanisms or become overwhelmed by the sudden influx of data. But with proper preparation, meditation practices that expand awareness, studies in quantum consciousness theory, training in what some call remote viewing or psychic phenomena, it's possible to maintain stability and coherence during interdimensional contact. The Cherokee shamans understood this, which is why their traditions included specific practices for consciousness development and entity communication. Modern practitioners of these techniques report similar experiences. Controlled contact with intelligences that exist beyond our normal dimensional framework, access to information about advanced technologies, and awareness of the larger cosmic community that humanity is only beginning to discover. The authorities know about these practices, which is why they work so hard to suppress and discredit them. Meditation is dismissed as stress reduction. Psychic phenomena are ridiculed as pseudoscience. Remote viewing is classified as military intelligence despite decades of successful operational use. They want you to believe these abilities are either impossible or limited to specially trained individuals. The truth is that every human being has the latent capacity for interdimensional awareness. These abilities aren't supernatural. They're natural functions of consciousness that have been systematically suppressed through education, media conditioning, and cultural programming designed to keep you locked into a purely materialist worldview. Think about it. Why would a civilization advanced enough for interdimensional travel be interested in a species that couldn't even perceive their existence? Why would they invest time and resources in studying creatures limited to a single-dimensional framework? The answer is obvious. They're not studying us as we currently exist, but as we could become. Human consciousness represents something unique in the cosmic community, a species capable of existing simultaneously in multiple dimensional frameworks while maintaining individual identity and creative autonomy. Most species either evolve toward collective consciousness and lose individuality, or maintain individuality and remain locked in single dimensions. We represent a third option, networked individual consciousness. Beings who can share information and resources while maintaining personal sovereignty. This makes us valuable as potential allies, dangerous as potential enemies, and absolutely crucial to understand and influence during our evolutionary transition period. The entities studying us through the thin places aren't just gathering intelligence. They're evaluating whether humanity can make this transition successfully, whether we can be trusted with interdimensional access, and what role we might play in the larger cosmic community. This evaluation process is accelerating as the barriers between dimensions continue to weaken. The phenomena that were once isolated to places like Hollow Ridge are now manifesting globally. Governments worldwide are struggling to maintain the cover-up as incidents become more frequent and more obvious. Recent leaked documents from various defense departments reveal preparation for what they call anomalous contact scenarios, essentially first contact protocols for dealing with interdimensional entities. These preparations aren't just defensive, they include communication strategies, negotiation frameworks, and contingency plans for managing public revelation of the phenomena. The timeline for disclosure appears to be measured in years, not decades. The entities themselves seem to be preparing for more open contact, with incidents becoming increasingly sophisticated and harder to explain through conventional means. Witnesses report more direct communication attempts, more obvious technological demonstrations, and clearer indications of intelligence and intentionality behind the phenomena. But here's the crucial point. When disclosure finally happens, it won't be revelation of something new. It will be acknowledgement of something that has been happening all along, something that certain individuals and organizations have known about and managed for generations. The question isn't whether you'll eventually learn about interdimensional contact. The question is whether you'll learn about it as a prepared participant or as a managed subject? Will you be someone who understands the phenomenon and can navigate it independently, or someone who has to rely on official explanations and institutional guidance? The difference matters more than you might realize, because interdimensional entities evaluate humans both individually and collectively. Your personal level of awareness, your capacity for consciousness expansion, your ability to maintain coherence during contact, all of these factors influence how you're perceived and what opportunities become available to you. This is why traditional shamanic cultures maintained specific bloodlines and training programs for individuals who would serve as intermediaries between human society and interdimensional intelligences. These weren't just spiritual practices. They were practical preparations for real contact with real entities that had real agendas and real power. The descendants of these traditions still exist, hidden within certain families, secret societies, and esoteric schools that have maintained the old knowledge despite centuries of suppression. They've been preparing for the return of open interdimensional contact, training individuals who can serve as bridges between human consciousness and entity awareness. But you don't need to be born into these traditions to develop the necessary abilities. The techniques can be learned by anyone with sufficient dedication and proper guidance. What's required is a willingness to abandon the comfortable limitations of consensus reality and embrace the responsibility that comes with expanded awareness. This means accepting that consciousness is fundamental, not emergent. It means understanding that reality is malleable, not fixed. It means recognizing that human potential extends far beyond what institutional science claims is possible. And it means taking personal responsibility for your own evolutionary development instead of waiting for authority figures to guide you. The Blackwood brothers made the mistake of approaching interdimensional phenomena from a purely materialist perspective. They thought they had found a new type of mineral, a physical substance that could be mined and exploited for profit. They didn't understand that consciousness and matter are different aspects of the same fundamental reality, that the black iron responded to intention as much as to physical manipulation. This is why their final days were filled with terror and confusion. They were trying to control forces they didn't understand using paradigms that were fundamentally inadequate to the task. The entities they contacted weren't malevolent, but they weren't constrained by human expectations or limitations either. When the brothers realized they couldn't control the situation, their only option was to contain it, to seal themselves into the mine and hope their sacrifice would prevent something catastrophic from emerging into the world. In a sense, they succeeded. The slow leak they created instead of a massive breach has given humanity over a century to prepare for what's coming. But their sacrifice will only be meaningful if we learn from their mistakes. If we approach interdimensional contact with wisdom instead of greed, with understanding instead of fear, with consciousness development instead of technological manipulation, the entities are still there, still waiting, still evaluating whether humanity is ready for the next phase of contact. Every person who develops interdimensional awareness, every individual who expands their consciousness beyond consensus limitations, every human being who demonstrates readiness for cosmic citizenship influences that evaluation. This is where individual choice becomes collective destiny. The entities don't just evaluate humanity as a species. They evaluate the consciousness development of specific individuals and communities. They're looking for humans who can serve as liaisons, translators, and guides for broader contact between our civilizations. These individuals aren't chosen randomly. They're identified through demonstrated ability to maintain coherence during consciousness expansion, through consistent development of psychic abilities, through understanding of the relationship between consciousness and reality, and through willingness to take responsibility for knowledge that could be dangerous in the wrong hands. If you've listened this far, if you've resonated with the information I've shared, you're already demonstrating some of the qualities they're looking for. But demonstration isn't enough. Development is required. The abilities must be cultivated, the understanding must be deepened, the responsibility must be accepted. This means more than just intellectual acknowledgement of interdimensional realities. It means practical development of consciousness expansion techniques. It means study of quantum physics, consciousness theory, and interdimensional communication protocols. It means preparation for experiences that will challenge everything you think you know about the nature of reality. Most importantly, it means accepting that once you begin this path, you become responsible not just for your own development, but for helping others navigate the transition that's coming. You become part of a network of individuals preparing humanity for its next evolutionary leap. The network already exists, hidden within various organizations, scattered across different countries, operating through encrypted communications and coded references that allow members to identify each other without revealing themselves to outside observation. Some work within government agencies, providing accurate intelligence about interdimensional phenomena while protecting sources and methods from those who would misuse the information. Others operate in academic institutions, conducting research that advances understanding while avoiding the career destruction that comes with open advocacy of fringe theories. Still others work independently, developing consciousness abilities, documenting experiences, and preparing for the time when open contact becomes undeniable. They share information through networks that appear to be focused on meditation, alternative healing, or esoteric philosophy, but actually serve as training grounds for interdimensional communication. These individuals understand that the transition period we're entering will be chaotic and potentially dangerous. Not everyone will be able to adapt to the revelation that reality is far stranger and more complex than they've been taught. Many will experience psychological breakdown when confronted with evidence that consciousness extends beyond individual brains and that human potential is far greater than institutional science admits. The network exists to provide guidance and support during this transition, to help individuals develop the abilities necessary for safe interdimensional contact, and to ensure that humanity's first official contact with cosmic civilization happens under the best possible circumstances. But the network can only be effective if it grows, if more individuals develop the necessary awareness and abilities, if the knowledge spreads beyond the small groups that have maintained it through centuries of suppression. This is why information like what I'm sharing with you tonight is becoming more available, why researchers are becoming bolder in their revelations, why witnesses are speaking out despite potential consequences. The timeline for disclosure is accelerating, and there's an urgent need to prepare as many people as possible for what's coming. The preparation isn't just intellectual, it's practical. It involves meditation techniques that expand awareness beyond individual consciousness. It includes study of physics concepts that explain how consciousness and matter interact at quantum levels. It requires development of psychic abilities that most people dismiss as impossible or fraudulent. Most importantly, it demands a fundamental shift in identity, from viewing yourself as a separate individual struggling for survival in a hostile universe, to understanding yourself as a temporary focal point of cosmic consciousness, exploring reality through human experience. This shift isn't just philosophical, it's practical. Entities operating from higher dimensional frameworks don't relate to individuals as separate beings, but as aspects of collective consciousness, exploring different perspectives simultaneously. If you can't make this conceptual leap, communication becomes impossible. The Cherokee shamans understood this, which is why their traditions included practices for dissolving ego boundaries while maintaining functional coherence. They could shift between individual awareness and collective consciousness as needed, communicating with entities that existed primarily in networked states while returning to human society with useful information and capabilities. Modern P.N. by Buadabidisigi. Practitioners report similar experiences: temporary dissolution of individual boundaries during deep meditation, access to information that couldn't have been obtained through normal means, communication with intelligences that exist beyond human conceptual frameworks, and development of abilities that conventional science claims are impossible. These experiences aren't hallucinations or wishful thinking. Their direct contact with aspects of reality that remain hidden from consensus awareness. But they require careful preparation and proper understanding to navigate safely. Without adequate grounding in both consciousness theory and practical techniques, such experiences can lead to psychological instability or worse. This is why the traditional systems required years of training before allowing students to attempt direct entity contact. This is why modern practitioners emphasize gradual development rather than forced breakthrough experiences. This is why the knowledge has been kept hidden from general population, not because it's inherently dangerous, but because it requires wisdom and responsibility to use safely. The Blackwood brothers had access to the technology, but not the wisdom. They could open the doors, but couldn't control what came through. They could establish contact, but couldn't manage the relationship effectively. You have the opportunity to learn from their mistakes, to approach these phenomena with proper preparation and understanding. But that opportunity won't last indefinitely. As the barriers between dimensions continue to weaken, as disclosure becomes inevitable, the window for controlled preparation is closing. Soon, everyone will be forced to confront the reality of interdimensional contact, whether they're prepared or not. Those who have developed the necessary awareness and abilities will be able to navigate the transition successfully. Those who remain locked in purely materialist worldviews will struggle to adapt to revelations that shatter their fundamental assumptions about reality. This isn't speculation, it's inevitable. The evidence is mounting daily. Government agencies are preparing disclosure protocols. Military organizations are developing contact procedures. Scientific institutions are beginning to acknowledge phenomena they've suppressed for decades. More significantly, the entities themselves are becoming less cautious about revealing their presence. Incidents that once occurred in remote locations are now happening near population centers. Phenomena that were once subtle and easily dismissed are becoming obvious and undeniable. The question isn't whether revelation will happen. The question is whether you'll be ready when it does. Will you be someone who can help others understand and adapt to the new reality, or someone who needs help from those who prepared in advance? The choice is yours, but the time to make it is now. The consciousness development that allows safe interdimensional contact takes time to cultivate. The understanding necessary to navigate entity relationships requires extensive study and practice. The wisdom needed to use these abilities responsibly develops only through consistent application and ethical consideration. You can't wait until disclosure happens and then decide to develop these capabilities overnight. The window for preparation is measured in years, not decades, and it's closing rapidly as events accelerate toward inevitable revelation. This means making fundamental changes in how you spend your time and energy. It means prioritizing consciousness development over entertainment consumption. It means studying subjects that mainstream education dismisses as fringe or fraudulent. It means practicing techniques that most people would consider strange or impossible. Most importantly, it means accepting responsibility for knowledge that could fundamentally alter human civilization. Because once Watahin, who develop these abilities, once you make contact with interdimensional intelligences, you become part of the transition process, whether you want to be or not. The entities will evaluate you based on your actions, not your intentions. They'll judge humanity partially based on the individuals they encounter who claim to represent our species' potential. Your development, your wisdom, your ethical choices become factors in determining humanity's future relationship with cosmic civilization. This is the burden and the opportunity that comes with forbidden knowledge. Once you know what the Blackwood brothers found in those tunnels, once you understand what's been hidden from humanity for generations, you can't return to comfortable ignorance. You become responsible for what you do with that knowledge. You become accountable for whether you use it to help others prepare for what's coming, or whether you use it for personal advantage at others' expense. You become part of the evaluation process that will determine whether humanity evolves or remains trapped in limitation. The entities watching us through the thin places aren't just studying our technology or our social structures. They're evaluating our consciousness development, our ethical maturity, our readiness for cosmic citizenship. Every individual who develops interdimensional awareness influences that evaluation. This is why the cover-up has been so systematic and so persistent. Those in power understand that knowledge of interdimensional realities would fundamentally alter the balance of authority in human society. They've worked for generations to maintain their position by controlling access to transformative information. But their control is failing as the phenomena themselves become impossible to hide. The choice now is between managed disclosure that maintains existing power structures or chaotic revelation that could lead to complete social transformation. The outcome depends partly on how many individuals develop the awareness and abilities necessary to navigate interdimensional contact independently. If only a small group of prepared individuals can handle entity communication, they become the gatekeepers for all future human-entity relationships. If larger numbers of people develop these capabilities, if the knowledge spreads widely enough to prevent monopolization, then humanity has a chance for truly democratic participation in cosmic civilization. This is why information like what I've shared tonight is becoming available despite the risks involved in revealing it. This is why researchers are becoming bolder in documenting and sharing their findings. This is why witnesses are speaking out despite potential consequences. The window for widespread preparation is closing, but it hasn't closed yet. There's still time for individuals like you to develop the necessary awareness and abilities. There's still opportunity to influence the evaluation process that will determine humanity's cosmic future. But that opportunity requires action, not just awareness. It requires commitment to consciousness development, study of interdimensional phenomena, and preparation for experiences that will challenge your fundamental assumptions about reality. Most importantly, it requires accepting responsibility for being part of humanity's transition into cosmic citizenship, for helping others navigate the revelation that's coming, for ensuring that our species' first official contact with interdimensional civilization happens under the best possible circumstances. The story of the Blackwood brothers isn't just historical curiosity, it's a warning and an opportunity. They found something that could have transformed human civilization, but they weren't prepared for the responsibility that came with such knowledge. Their fear and ignorance led to tragedy that's still unfolding more than a century later. You have the chance to do better. You have access to information they lacked, understanding they never developed, preparation they couldn't make. You can approach interdimensional contact with wisdom instead of greed, with consciousness development instead of technological manipulation, with responsibility instead of exploitation. But only if you choose to accept the challenge. Only if you're willing to abandon the comfort of consensus reality and embrace the magnificent terror of unlimited possibility. Only if you understand that knowledge of the thin places comes with obligations as well as opportunities. The walls between dimensions are thinning. The entities are preparing for more open contact. The authorities are running out of ways to maintain the cover-up. The revelation is coming whether humanity is ready or not. The question is whether you'll be among those who help guide our species through this transition successfully, or among those who have to be guided because they weren't prepared for the truth about reality. The choice is yours. The knowledge is available. The techniques can be learned. The abilities can be developed. But time is running short, and the window for preparation won't remain open indefinitely. Choose wisely. Your decision doesn't just affect your own future. It influences the cosmic evaluation that will determine humanity's place in the larger universe. The Blackwood brothers opened a door that can never be completely closed. The only question now is whether we'll walk through it with wisdom or be dragged through it by forces we don't understand. Remember, the walls are thin, and something is always listening.